right. Good morning. Thank you so much for being with us this morning for today's event, Public Charter School Data in Focus, a deep dive into Stanford University's National Charter School Study. I'm David Mansuri, I serve as President CEO of the State Collaborative on Reforming Education. We're very excited to be co-hosting today's event with the Tennessee Charter School Center, and I know on behalf of Dr. Maya Bug, the Center CEO, and myself, we're just really honored to have you all here with us this morning for this conversation. So high quality public charter schools are one strategy supporting and accelerating student learning in Tennessee. A total of 114 public charter schools currently operate in our state, serving just over 43,000 students, or about 5% of all public school students in Tennessee. And in our state, public charter schools are primarily concentrated in our state's urban areas and serve more students from historically underserved groups than their traditional public school peers. As I know we all know, charter schools are public schools, free to attend and open to all students within the geographic boundaries of the district where the charter school is located. Nationally, public charter schools serve 3.7 million students and roughly 7,800 schools and campuses, accounting for about 7.5% of all public school students in America. And today we're excited to host a conversation about a new national study that assesses students' academic growth in charter schools across the United States. Stanford University's Center for Research on Education Outcomes, or CREDO, has studied the impact of public charter schools since the release of the first national charter school study in 2009. The most recent study, released this summer in June, was the third installment of that work. And each study examines the academic progress of students enrolled in public charter schools compared with the progress of students enrolled in traditional public schools. The study relies on state data systems to track student outcomes over time and matches charter students to their, quote, virtual twin from non-charter schools. The academic gains are then measured in additional days of learning based on a 180-day school year. Today, we're honored to have Macke Raymond, CREDO's founder and director, with us to share results from that study and reflections on what the study may mean for our work in Tennessee moving forward. So for this morning's event, we are going to begin with a presentation from Macke, where she will share more about the results from the study, highlighting national data and data also specific to Tennessee. Following Macke's remarks, we will then have time for an open Q&A discussion with Macke, so be thinking as you're listening to her presentation about any questions that you would have or reflections you would have as you see this research. And then we'll hear from a set of Tennessee education leaders discussing what these results mean for Tennessee's public charter school students. And then my colleague, Dr. Maya Bug, will give us a closing and call to action around where we go next in this work. Before I introduce Macke, I also want to just thank a number of folks for being with us today. We have, in particular, I know a number of policymakers who are in the room. Senator Bill Powers, welcome from the Tennessee legislature. We have a number of members of the State Board of Education who are here, as well as a number of other partners that we work very closely with across the state. So welcome. So I'm excited to now turn to Macke Raymond for our keynote presentation. Macke has served as founder and director of the Center for Research on Education Outcomes at Stanford University since its inception in 1999. The CREDO team conducts rigorous and independent analysis and evaluation of promising programs that aim to improve outcomes for students in the United States K-12 public schools. Under her leadership, Macke has steered the group to national prominence as a rigorous and independent source for policy and program analysis. Before joining Stanford, Macke held faculty positions in the political science and economics department at the University of Rochester. She's also worked for a number of years in the telecommunications industry and was president of Raymond Associates, a private consulting company specializing in public policy research projects, and telecommunications policy formulation from 1985 to 2000. Very excited and honored to have Macke with us, and I hope you all will join me in welcoming her to Nashville this morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm a little bit boggled by how many people want to turn up and do data so early in the morning, but obviously my people, so thank you for coming this morning. I'm very excited to be able to speak with you about the national study, but really I want to put an emphasis on what's happened in Tennessee, because that's the story that you're most interested in, and lucky for all of us, it's a really great story. Before I start, I do want to acknowledge that all of the raw data that we use in our analysis comes from the Tennessee Department of Education through a FERPA compliant data use agreement, and we want to express appreciation for them allowing us to use the data, and also appreciation for Tara at Vanderbilt. They do the yeoman duty of arranging data. I would never, ever volunteer for that job. I can't imagine why they said yes to that, but they make it easier for us, and so we're very grateful. So I think it might be useful to start with two things about CREDO before we get into the study itself. We have a mantra. The little tagline that usually appears under our name is, "We let the data speak." And what we mean by that is that as much as we may have personal ideas or personal preferences for what we would like, ultimately what we're aiming for is great schools for all kids, and we're pretty much agnostic about what form that will take. And so while many people would like to label us as advocates, we are actually not pro-charter or anti-district or the reverse of that. We're just for great schools for all kids. That requires us to have a certain arm's length relationship to the work that we do. And what we tell our clients when we do our work is we always hope for the best. You don't spend months and months and months slogging through data without hoping for a good outcome. That's as much our aspiration as anybody else's. But at the end of the day, if the data are not favorable, we will throw you under the bus. And there you are. So I want to talk about both our independence and our commitment to being this independent voice. It's a very rare thing, it turns out, across research and across advocacy organizations. It's lonely at times, and I'm not here to do therapy with you. I just want to say that our friendships actually swing across states and across advocacy groups and other organizations, depending on what the latest study says. And we've gotten used to that. So with that as a sort of, it's lonely here over at CREDO, we're really excited about what came out of this last study. And I want to share a little bit about that with you. We used data for a 5-year period. We stopped just before the pandemic. So when you see 18-19 school year, what that means is we got the very last data on student test scores before the pandemic hit. So the 5 years of test scores before then constitute our data set. And you need 2 years of individual data in subsequent years in order to be able to create a growth measure. And we have a technique for doing that. So we're looking at growth because we want to be able to isolate the contribution that schools make to student learning. That's not to say that there aren't other things that are important, but for us, the question that we're answering here is, how are charter schools helping students progress in their academic development? Then we want to try to get rid of everything else. And so our technique isolates the factor of schools and allows us to do that because we're looking at growth. We do have this thing called the virtual control record. And what that does is take every single charter school and treat it as though it's its own little kingdom. And we look at all of the other schools in that geographic area that lose students to that school. So every charter school has its own little cluster of district-related schools that are having their students move into the charter school. That pool of district schools then is where we try to find our matches, because it's the closest thing we can get to you're sitting in the same seat. And we match on a variety of demographic and personal details, but we also match on prior test scores. And this is what gives us the ability to say growth in this sector is different from growth in this sector. So out of all of this, and it's a big, hairy set of statistical things that we do, we end up with every single charter school student having an amalgamated match of what they would have learned had they gone to a district school otherwise in their community. And it's based on that, then, that we're able to do this national study. We have data agreements with 30 states. And for the purposes of this study, we treat Washington, D.C. as a state, and we treat New York City as a state, because if we didn't pull that out separately, it would completely swamp the rest of the charter schools in New York State. And there are about 350 of those that we would just never be able to say anything about. So we say we have 31 states, and we look at this incredible 2.8 million kids in our data and say, how much do they learn in a year's time? And what you're looking at on this slide is the most recent results from the 2023 study. Remember, it ends in the 18-19 school year. And what we found is that there's positive and statistically significant academic progress for charter school kids compared to what they would have learned had they gone to their district schools. And what that translates to is 16 extra days in reading. So that's like going to school for 3 extra weeks. And 6 extra days of learning in math. That's like going to school for an extra week. You may have noticed in some of the literature or some of the news that some people look at that and go, so what? My answer to that is 2.8 million kids, and we're moving the needle like this. That is a big deal. As David mentioned, this is the third of these studies. We now think of ourselves sort of like in the science fiction world. We have a trilogy. We're all excited. We started this work in 2009. You can see from these results, the story for charter schools was not positive. It was negative and significant in both reading and math. Dare I say we were unpopular in the charter space? We literally got sent to Siberia. There was no one in the charter space who would talk to us for over a year. They were so ripped with these results. But, to their credit, they said, well, the data are the data, right? She's not making this stuff up, so what do we do about it? And that actually started, so this is in 2009. That started a conversation that continues to this day. And if there's a moment of ownership in this, please forgive us for taking it, because I really believe up until then it had been a quantity conversation, like let's just open as many schools as we possibly can. And what we asked people to do with these data was to think about quality. And so a lot of things have happened in the space since then. We repeated the study in 2013, and we found that, as you can see from the 2009-2013 increment, we did find that there was progress. There was statistically significant positive growth in reading, and we had no difference in math. Well, that doesn't sound like it's a good story until you realize that you came from negative 17 days, which was pretty much not good news. So we could see progress. I'm not telling tales out of school to say getting permission for the third study was double the effort. We had to convince 30 states that they wanted to know the next answer. We wanted the next study. And even my own home state in California tried to put basically choke orders on our agreements that they got to shut down the study if they didn't like the answers. Which, if you're sitting at a university that's devoted to the advancement of knowledge, that doesn't sit very well. So we were all waiting, desperate for our lead analyst to come into the staff meeting with the results for the third one. We were on pins and needles, because you can imagine that line could have gone anywhere. It could have just flattened out as the sector grew. It could be that we had a glorious moment in 2013 and everything fell off the cliff after that. We were pretty excited to find that we got the results this last time that the charter sector themselves has created. So this is the moment where I get to say, I crunch these numbers, but you guys make these numbers, and that's a huge difference. I want to celebrate that with you. I got no juice here, folks. Aha, let's try that. Appreciate it. Okay. The reason that I'm here and zeroing in on Tennessee has to do with that little red states. We had a big difference in the results that we got when we look across the states. Could be we have a battery problem here. Can somebody just advance the slide for me? Okay, thank you. Hold it right there. We found across the 31 states that we looked at that 18 states had positive significant growth in reading. 12 states were no different than what they would have gotten had the students gone down the street. And one state was negative and statistically significant. What is surprising to me is how different these are and how they speak to the differences in the operating environments in which charter schools do their work. And so we started to get the hint here that there's something at the policy level that's going on. And when we looked at math, could you do the 3 click, click, click? Thank you. We saw even greater variation. The magnitude of the changes is even greater in math, even though there are fewer states that do well. This is a real clue. And when we have a state like Tennessee or New York State, where there is a very, very strong pattern of outstanding work, the question for us isn't, Jay, here's the numbers, have a good day. It's what's going on here. And that was really the impetus for the insights that we drew from this last study. So let's dive into Tennessee. What you're seeing here is a handy dandy map that shows you the demography and school profiles of all of the schools, all of the district schools in Tennessee in the first column. That feeder pool that I described to you that serves up all of the students for our matches is the feeder profile. And this is an important distinction because those are schools that are different from the whole of the state, largely because of geography and where charter schools have committed to serve. And then we have the final column of charter schools and what their demography is. Now, David said we have nearly 40,000 students. That was a more current statistic. In our data, we only have 38,000, but the patterns are still the same. And what I want to point out to you is just based on these statistics, charter schools are educating a more challenging population than even the district schools in their neighborhoods. I would encourage you to grab this chart and hand deliver it to anybody who says charter schools are cream skimming. I'll talk about that in a second. You can see that the percentages of students served in ELL and SPED is about the same. We usually use 2% as the difference before we start looking at it being a significant thing. But look at the percentage of white students. Even compared to the feeder schools, charter schools enroll a much lower percentage of white students. And if you just jump down a few, about the same number of Native Americans and about the same number of Hispanics, but look at the Black percentages. This is a dramatically skewed population just based on demography. We did a study to find out whether this demographic profile translates into performance at the door when students enroll. And so the test of cream skimming is, are kids who are more advantaged coming to charter schools compared to their twins who are going to district schools? And you can't see that necessarily based on demography, but you can certainly see it if you look at their starting scores when they come to the school. That's the study we did for this third analysis. And we found that there were very, very few examples, 3 to be exact, of places where the charter schools were enrolling a more advantaged population than they were in the district schools. The vast majority of the tests that we did, and so we did 1 for reading and 1 for math in each of the states, the vast majority of these tests were a substantially lower achievement rate coming in the door than you would get for the kids going in the regular district schools down the street. This means that you have a much more challenging academic community that you're educating than you would had you just been the district school down the street, and far more than the state as a whole. So we believe that at least at the front door, we have refuted the allegation that districts cream skim students. That's just not the case. It doesn't show up in the data. And we think that that's a really important piece to carry with you in your arsenal of, yeah, wait a second, that's not true. Here's the way that you can refute that. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay. These are the Tennessee state results. And we already showed you on the state-by-state slide the 34 days of learning and the 39 days of learning in reading and math. Want to point out that there was a pretty significant reduction from the last study that we did in 2013. But if you look at how dynamic the sector has been in Tennessee, you're going to see that there are more schools coming online than is the rate of increase of your base is higher in Tennessee. You're gaining more schools, you're gaining more students at a faster rate than you're seeing in other places. The fact that you have been able to maintain this level of strength in the growth that you produce while sustaining growth is in and of itself a pretty important finding. So we would normally look to charter management organizations and say, is this the reason why schools are doing better? And in our national study, we see a huge difference between CMO schools and standalone charter schools, which is what SCS stands for. Much stronger results in CMO affiliated charter student growth. That's not the case here. And I'm surprised by this. Let me just say, good results all the way around. So there's nothing negative about these findings. What's interesting and what I really want to put a pin in is that you have standalone charter schools who are beating the record of CMOs. And what that says in terms of the implications for how schools can move forward and how the sector can move forward, we'll have a chance to talk about in the Q&A. Okay. This slide also surprises me. I am not as surprised to see the strong and positive results for Asians and white students as I am about where the charter school growth sits. Now, remember when we did the demography slide, 75% of your students are Black, and they are the ones that have the lower achievement. Their particular starting achievement is the lowest of all of the race ethnic groups. You've got a really strong performance for Black students, the majority of your students in reading. Your math scores are not statistically different from what you would get down the street. And the reason it's not statistically different, I was looking at this on the airplane yesterday, is because you have some schools that are doing really, really well with Black students in math, and you've got some schools that are just not doing well at all, like really negative. And so when we have that wide a difference across all the schools, it's really difficult to be better than the district schools down the street. So you do not get any stars on your on the math scores for Black students. My sense is that a little bit of targeted intervention on the low performing schools would do a lot for you in terms of bringing up that result. There is an evolving dialogue in the academic world, you probably have it as well, that race, ethnicity is not the driver of performance, it's actually SES, and SES being an indicator of how large a circle you have in your world and how well you know how the world, what's in the world and how the world relates to each other. That is completely driven by SES, not by race, ethnicity. And so we look at poverty, we look at English language learners, and we look at SPED as student groups who are distinct enough in their academic preparations that we want to look at them a little bit differently. And again, Tennessee has a really good story to tell, positive and significant for both poverty and ELL in both subjects. And unlike the rest of the nation, where SPED is negative and statistically significant in both subjects, you guys are above the line in both. And the 32% positive that you have in reading is unheard of. We do not have this in the rest of the country. So pat yourselves on the back for that. Again, the variation in math has to do with the fact that some schools are doing well and some schools are doing really badly with their SPED students. So again, if there's a takeaway item to work on in the future, this is another one of those. Okay, all of that I've shown you has been at the student level. We want to talk about what happens with individual schools. And so we group all of the schools, all the students in a charter school, we group them together. And then we take all of their virtual twins and we group them together. And we say, at the average of those two groups, is the charter school doing better? Is it doing about the same, or is it doing worse? And the darker bars are the worst part and the lighter bars are the better than part. And you are just about nailing the national average here. 37% of your schools are doing better. That's a big change from the last time we did this study. So more of your schools are getting better than the competition down the street. The numbers are almost identical for math as well. We have 17% reading is the worst than percentage for the national average. You have 16, and we have 25% for math, and you have 26. That's not statistically significant. So the news here is that your schools are getting better over time, and that's why the size of your better than part of the distribution is growing over time. And that's a really important implication. So we've shown you that demography is different. We've shown you that starting scores are different. What that adds up to for us is that you have been successful in the face of having a more challenging population to educate, and that's something to really celebrate. Even though your scores are lower than they were when we looked at this 10 years ago, it's in the face of substantial growth. And so the fact that you've been able to maintain really strong and positive growth is, again, a testament to the schools really focusing in on performance, even as growth is occurring in the sector. I will say that I think what these data do not show us is we can see in the national trends that there's this change in performance over time. The fact that Tennessee is such an outlier in terms of the positive growth really points to the fact that the policy environment that you have here in Tennessee has a couple of attributes that I think really make the help us to explain what we're seeing in the data. Your authorizing function in Tennessee has gotten a lot clearer and a lot less varied. So in many states, we haven't gotten to that yet. I just spent last week in a state that has very, very bad results. And what I was able to share with them was across the number of authorizers that they have, what they ask for in terms of the opening threshold to open a school is all over the map, and their criteria for what they ask for at the point of renewal is all over the map. And the kicker on this is, and what they do with really underperforming schools isn't all over the map, and it isn't where it needs to be. So those three things help me to explain the low performing stuff, and the antithesis of that is what helps me to explain the results that we see in Tennessee. I'm going to draw this to a close because I know that there's a lot more to come today. Happy to answer any questions that you have in the Q&A.
Hello, great. Thank you, Macke. All right, so we're going to open it up for questions. I have a couple of questions that I can ask if folks do not have questions, but I know John already has his hand raised, so he's ready to go.
Did a number of extra days worth of teaching as the difference? Because if you were a superintendent and you saw that somebody was 20 days ahead of you, you would say, well, let's just keep the school open 20 more days. So it implies to me that each school district and otherwise, the learning is about the same. It's just charter schools seem to, add extra learning. I guess the question is if the district schools just stayed open extra days, that wouldn't necessarily make their scores go up, would it?
So let's be clear, both the comparison of district and charter schools is on a 180-day base. So what that speaks about isn't additional days in the classroom. What that speaks about is that the slope of how fast kids are learning is higher in charter schools over the equivalent period of time. So what you're getting in these extra days of learning is a higher productivity of learning in your schools. That's the way the economists would describe it. You're getting more output from your teachers in 180 days than the teachers down the street. If you added extra days to the district, do I think they would come close? Absolutely not, because their slope is already lower than yours. And so you'd get some additional bump, but it would not be anywhere close to what you're talking about here. You fundamentally, you have a productivity argument here about why your schools in the charter sector in Tennessee are doing better. It's the same conundrum that we have with the post-COVID solutions. Do we add extra days for additional learning? Well, that works only at the pace at which kids learn. Right? You're not changing that at all. If you want to actually bump the recovery, you've got to change the intensity of how much kids learn in any one period of time. And that goes right back to what happens in the classroom. Does that get to your answer?
Yeah, I think a lot of people that don't understand all of that detail, like this, well, actually 17 days, just doesn't seem like what the numbers, the actual progress, efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was just interested that y'all use that as y'all's guide.
So let me ask the room a question. How many of you wake up every day thinking in standard deviation units? Not a one of you. I'm not surprised. The reason that we did the conversion is because people don't understand what 0.01 means or 0.05 in a standardized distribution. When we do our analysis, the statistics come out in how much did you move the student in the standard distribution using standard deviation units. That's the way that academics do the work, and that's the conversations that they have. And you walk out of the room and you try to talk to folks who are normal and no idea. So we created the conversion just to try to give people a handle on, it's like the kid went to school for 17 more days, but you got all of that in the 180-day period.
What standards, how many days?
One standard deviation is 580 days.
I just want to name that the SCORE team members who wanted to raise their hand when Macke asked that question about thinking in standard deviations. I see you. So thank you. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, Ryan, up front.
There's a microphone coming to you.
First of all, thank you for doing this study. There's so much valuable information in it, and also for pushing through. It sounds like some resistance in doing it. At the end, when you were talking about why some states seem to be having different results than others and pointed to authorizer quality consistency, is that something that you are seeing in the data that you're doing statistical analyses on that? Or is that more anecdotal from just looking at some of those states and trying to figure out what might be happening there?
No, the next wave of the study is to actually try to map this into a causal relationship, because as much as charter schools have gotten better, and we want to really recognize that, authorizers have gotten better too. And so you can think about trying to map the various efforts that they have made, and they differ across states. But authorizers have tried different things in different places, and you can actually sort of map whether they're getting more rigorous or whether they're getting more consistent in the work that they're doing, because you can see the results. You can infer whether they're getting bigger and better at what they do, and then see if that actually helps explain in a future period that the schools that are coming in are better, and the schools that are allowed to remain open are the ones that we would want that for. So we're not there yet. The anecdotal evidence that we see in places like Tennessee and New York, I can actually point to the things in Tennessee that happened and see it in the data, but I haven't done that on a statistical basis.
Would you be willing to point to the things in Tennessee that you saw happen?
Well,
just out of curiosity.
So the details are a little complicated here, but one of the things that happened is that Tennessee finally went with the NACSA guidelines about what authorizing should pay attention to and stopped trying to intervene in schools. So there was a period where there was a lot of coaching going on, and coaching from an authorizer perspective is, in my view, not the right way to go. You need to have accountability be a pure accountability function. So watching that solidify, and then watching the way that they have actually created the reports that they use, and watching the way that they have used those reports in their decisions, seems to be the path that we can point to. Does that make sense? It does. Okay, great. Does it align with what you understand?
Yes.
There's another story I'm going to get from you at the break.
Ryan actually is going to be on the panel, so we might have the opportunity to hear his perspective on what led to that too. Yes, Elizabeth.
Thank you. And this question is actually from a school operator that is watching online.
Oh.
It is from, he told me to say this, your friend Bob Nardo, who was...
Oh, dear Lord. The Nardo. I haven't heard that name in years. Oh, that's great. Hi, Bob.
He said that Tennessee is perhaps unique in having a high number of charters that are operating neighborhood schools through our Achievement School District. He has two questions. First, have you found this difficult to study because the ASD schools do not have the same lottery type admissions? They are serving the students who are zoned to that school. That creates students with equal chances of being included or not. And second, have you noticed any distinction there?
So we have not broken out the ASD schools in this study, but as Nardo knows, we spent a fair amount of time looking at ASD schools in the prior decade. And the fact that they were neighborhood schools did not mean that they were significantly different in the students that they enrolled. If you look at them from the standpoint of demography and what their community endowments look like. What did happen was that there was a much more challenging transition period to taking a neighborhood school and making it a charter school. And mostly that had to do with the cultural realignment around students learning being the center of the equation in the school. The charter schools did get that right, but it took much, much longer. Mr. Barbic is here. He can tell you the gory details of that. But we didn't break them out in this study to see if in fact they have a different improvement trajectory.
We probably have time for 2 more questions, and then we'll move to our panel discussion. Yes, Dwayne.
Do you anticipate the next time you complete the process that there's going to be significant shifts in demographics? Like, for example, in our case, African Americans are down dramatically in terms of participating in our charter network, and Hispanics are going up. Gentrification and a lot of things are contributing to that, but do you anticipate seeing some big shifts in terms of the demographics the next time around?
Yeah, so you're actually speaking of not just a local phenomenon, but a national phenomenon as well. Just based on what I see in the projections, I think your claim is correct. If I were to predict what that would mean for the actual results, they would go up, because if you remember, the Hispanic results were more positive. So if you increased that proportion, that would, all other things being equal, that would lift the results. I think the bigger challenge for me is what we're seeing in our data is that entering students are less and less prepared. And so, and part of this is a pandemic phenomenon, but we actually saw that even before the pandemic, that the students that were, like each successive cohort is just a little bit less prepared. And so I'm a little bit hesitant to say it's a slam dunk, because I don't know what particular attributes those students are going to bring with them. But if they look like what we have here, I think your results would go up.
All right, time for maybe one more question.
Or not?
Sarah, yeah.
I'll make it a short one and build on my colleagues here in the front row. So I am very interested as a policymaker to kind of where you're headed with the causal analysis and looking at the policy implications that might in some ways contribute to the results in Tennessee. So what's the timing for that release? And can you give us any preview on other things that might be affecting Tennessee's scores beyond the charter authorizing quality piece?
So as you might imagine, it was, as I mentioned, it was very difficult to get permission to do this study. Getting permission to do this next study is going to be even more difficult. And that's, we're happy to use the data that we have here to do the study that we're talking about. But a lot of our state partners are even more gun shy now with these study results than they were before. And so there's a real challenge for us in terms of, one, can we do a study that ends in 2019 and have it matter? And a lot of policymakers are telling me, don't bring me anything unless it's post-pandemic. If it's post-pandemic, then data quality becomes a huge issue, and the political resistance that we see in many of our states also would factor in. I think what we're ending up doing is we're going to probably do this in a much smaller subset. And I have to be honest and say, I don't know if Tennessee is going to be part of that.
Please join me in thanking Macke for that amazing presentation. Thank you, Macke. All right, we're going to turn next to our discussion with Tennessee leaders, really reflecting on the research and data that we just saw. Really excited to have an amazing moderator for this panel, Dr. Elaine Swafford, who I will introduce, and then Dr. Swafford will introduce our other panelists this morning. So Dr. Swafford is in her 41st amazing year of serving in public K-12 and higher education. In 2012, Elaine took the helm of Chattanooga Girls Leadership Academy, the first all-girls public charter STEM school in the state of Tennessee. And after being on the brink of closure prior to her arrival, the school has now earned reward school status and TBOS level 5 numerous times, among many other awards. Prior to her work at CGLA, Elaine was the executive principal of the Howard School of Academics and Technology, the Area 2 superintendent for the Hamilton County Department of Education, the vice president of student affairs at Chattanooga State, and the founding CEO of Chattanooga Preparatory School. In 2021, Dr. Swafford and her team also opened the first Chattanooga Public Montessori School, an elementary charter school, Montessori Elementary at Highland Park. In addition to her role leading Chattanooga Girls Leadership Academy and Montessori Elementary at Highland Park, Elaine serves as the chair of the Tennessee Charter School Center Board of Directors, the president of the Chattanooga Downtown Rotary, and the chair of the University of Tennessee Chattanooga Chancellor's Roundtable. She was appointed as a trustee of the Benwood Foundation and was a member of Class 5 of Leadership Tennessee, which is the second best class of Leadership Tennessee after mine. In 2021, Elaine received the Noble Women National Shining Star Award for Education, and really is just a educational leader with incredible passion and vision in our state. So please join me in welcoming Elaine, who will also then introduce the rest of our panel. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, David, for that introduction. And I'm excited to welcome our panel of Tennessee leaders here with me. And so first, I will start with Holly here to my immediate left. Holly has served as the program director for high quality education for the Hyde Family Foundation since 2016. And in this role, Holly leads educational philanthropic efforts and the foundation's work to transform education outcomes in Memphis. With more than 20 years in public finance banking and advisory, community development finance, strategy consulting, and senior management in not-for-profits, Holly has built a career across public, private, and the not-for-profit sectors. She holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Howard University, an MBA from Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. Thank you for being with us today, Holly. I'm going to skip over here to the end to Ryan, to my far left here. Ryan represents the 5th Congressional District on the Tennessee State Board of Education. He is a native Nashvilleian. Ryan earned a BA in Economics and Philosophy from Vanderbilt University, an MA in Economics from University of Nebraska, and a JD from Vanderbilt University Law School. Ryan practices business litigation at the law firm of Sherrod, Rowe, Voigt, and Harbison, where he's been recognized by the best lawyers in America, super lawyers, and benchmark litigation. And after college, Ryan actually taught 6th grade math in a public school in New York City. And in 2011, he became the founding board member of Intrepid College Prep Charter School, and for which he has served the past 6 years, including 12 years, and the 6 years he served as board chair. So thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Legra, sitting next to Ryan, Legra Newman is the founder and the head of School of Purpose Prep Academy. Under her leadership, Purpose Prep is a 3-time reward school and the first elementary school in North Nashville to achieve this status for the academic performance for ranking within the top 5% of schools in the state. That's a big deal. Purpose Prep serves 350 students in grades K through 5 in North Nashville, and 95% of their students are students of color. Prior to funding Purpose Prep, Legra served as a teacher in Los Angeles and continued her teaching and school leadership career in Washington, D.C. Legra earned a BA from Vanderbilt University, a MA at Loyola Marymount at University, and an MED in public leadership from the Teachers College of Columbia University. Thank you, Legra. And then, of course, Dwayne Tucker, last but not least. He's the CEO of Lead Public Schools, Nashville's largest homegrown charter school network. Lead operates 6 charter schools, both open and zoned enrollment, serving over 2,800 students. Almost 90% of Lead students are students of color, and nearly 50% are active and transitional English language learners. Under Dwayne's leadership, Lead Public Schools has continued the momentum with all 6 of its schools, all of them meeting or exceeding growth standards outlined by the Tennessee Value Added Assessment System, known to us lovingly as TVAS, for the 22-23 school year. And prior to Lead, Dwayne spent 30 years as both a leader of human capital and operations executive in the financial services and transportation industries with Fortune 500 companies, First Data, Northwest Airlines, and Alliance Data. He's a Nashville native, and Dwayne graduated from Tennessee State University with a BA in Business Administration. So thank you, Dwayne, and all of you for joining us today. Please welcome me and welcome our guests, please. Please join me. All right, so I'd like to start with a question for all of you. We just heard Macke talk about the results from CREDO's most recent national charter school study. So the question is, what stands out most to you about these results, and what do they mean to Tennessee public charter school students? And I'll let anyone, I won't call you out in any order in this one, I'll just let you answer the question. What stands out most to you about these results, and what do they mean for our students?
I can start. As I think about this, 3 things really stand out, and I'm really proud because I work so closely with the charter sector and have worked within the charter sector. And I think one, it just affirms that we really are growing students faster, and they're students that are coming from further behind. So that's really important when I think about the students we serve in Memphis, because our students are starting many grade levels behind. So it's really important that those students are growing faster than average in order for them to catch up and for us to close the achievement gap. And so charters are an important part of that. And the second thing, being from Memphis specifically, is that we have to be growing students in Memphis for the state results to look like they look, because we do have 2/3 of the charter schools in Memphis. And I think that it's really important that Memphis keeps that in mind and keeps our foot on the gas, because we really do help drive those results. And one thing I'm really proud of, for example, this year, not the years of the study, but this year, half of the schools in Memphis that were level 5 TVAS were charter schools. So out of 69 schools, 34 of them, 50% were charter schools, and charters only make up 25% of our district. And so, we really are a part of the overall growth of students in Tennessee, charter schools and students in traditional public schools as well. So it's important we continue to grow. And I think the last thing that I'm really proud of, and I've seen it firsthand on the ground in Memphis, is that we are serving, as Macke pointed out, we're serving the students that are the hardest to serve, that are coming from the furthest behind. The majority of our students in Memphis are students of color. Many of our schools serve a mostly Black population, a growing Hispanic population. But the fact that we're serving those students well, and as well as subpopulations are economically disadvantaged. A lot of our schools might be serving 90 to 100% economically disadvantaged ELL students and SPED. And it's just a testament to our teachers and leaders that they really do believe all students can succeed, and that all students deserve access to a high quality education.
Thank you. Any?
I thought the presentation was at least for my own personal self-esteem, it went up dramatically. But the point, I think in terms of how you went about the evaluation and finding your virtual twin sort of equalizes the perception on the playing field about how to best value the work that charters do, because you matched it up with the right set of demographics. So I thought that part was very important, because most of the information that we see that's communicated has somewhat of a slant to it, and it's not apples to apples, it's more bananas to coconuts kind of thing. And in this case, finding your virtual twin and then looking at the performance that way sort of then highlights the benefit of what's really going on and the transformation for families and students across, in this case, Nashville. It tells a much better story.
Leverage you have?
Yes, as a school leader, I am so proud to be in Nashville, certainly in Tennessee. I think that we should really own the results that are coming out of this study. We are very appreciative of this data and should really shout it on the mountaintops, because the work that we are doing is significantly enhancing the quality of life of our children, and that's so important. I also think, to build on what you said, Holly, to know that we're serving, there's such a myth out there about charter schools cherry picking, and it's so false. And even if we look at Nashville, we have a lottery system that is tied through the school district. There is no way we can cherry pick. Literally, the district owns how children are allocated into our school. And so both this data and just the logistics of how children enter into charter schools, particularly a school like Purpose Prep, there is no way that we could cherry pick. So to see the data reflected in the demographics and to see the students we serve, I think about serving a predominantly African American base, which is so critical, given how public school systems have historically failed children of color, particularly African Americans. I see Nashville Propel in our audience. I know that there's the advocacy for families and making sure that children have options and high quality charter options is so important. I know that advocacy is taking place in Memphis with Memphis Lift. And so we really need to own these results, celebrate them, and recognize the value that we are having in our state.
Thank you.
And I would just add, from a policymaker perspective, and as a quick disclaimer, I'm a lawyer for my day job, so I like disclaimers. Whatever views I have here are just mine, not the State Board of Education. But once I get my lawyer disclaimer out of the way, I thought it was really interesting how consistently positive the results were across different subgroups. They certainly varied in the positivity, but how, from SPED students, different, racial demographics, single site versus CMOs, how just across the board that the results were positive. I also found it really interesting how the single site schools performed relative to CMOs. And I think, if one were to draw some conclusions for that, it seems like there likely would be opportunities for high quality expansion if you have, this many schools that are doing so well across such a broad range of demographics.
Thank you. I'm going to turn for a minute and ask some specific questions. And Dwayne, I think I'll start with you. In this recent report, LEAD was identified as one of CREDO's gap-busting networks, which are networks that have eliminated, as we know, learning disparities for students and moved their achievement ahead of the state's average performance. So the question is, I have two, I'll follow up with another one, but what would you attribute your success to in this area?
Well, first of all, just one statement. Well, actually, two statements. One, wish this came out before the board finalized my CEO evaluation, but we'll keep that in mind next time. But on a serious note, I think in our case, we are 5 through 12 network, and we're probably the only charter network in town that focuses primarily on zoned enrolled schools. So the enrollment and where the feeder group comes from where students to come into our network is very important, because most of those are bottom 5 priority schools. So the kids coming into our 5th grade or 6th grade tend to be 2 to 3 grade levels behind. So our academic lift is huge. So one of the things that we came to realization on at Lee Public Schools about 4.5 years ago was that the key to making up that difference and making it sustainable over time in terms of consistent academic achievement really comes down to having great teachers. The academic curriculum is second to that because it doesn't really matter if you're not keeping the teachers in the classroom. And what we decided to do was go a total different direction. Instead of losing 60, 70 teachers a year, 60 or 70% of our teachers each year, we decided to move away from the current compensation plan that was in place and created what we call our employee value proposition for Lee Public Schools. That employee value proposition provides pay for performance for our teachers. Our teachers now can earn up to 10% base salary adjustments each year. If you go back 4 years from today, many of our teachers that are high performers have achieved a 40% increase at base salary. We're well under our way where at the end of this school year, some of our high performing teachers are going to be knocking on the door of $100,000 a year for 10-month employees. Our retention of teachers has gone up dramatically each year since then. On our high performing teacher retention rate, we're close to about 90% of bringing those back. As a network, all the rest of our support staff, the support teachers, are also on a pay for performance plan. We brought back almost 85% of all positions back this year. I think that has something to do with the long-term look in terms of how we want to develop that employee value proposition. And since teachers are number one, we also offer 16-week paid maternity leave for our teachers. In addition to that, we want to make sure not only do we keep our best teachers in the classroom and drive better results, we also know that people quit their boss. So at the end of the day, for all of our leaders in our network, as part of our employee value proposition, we invest into their leadership development. So all of our principals actually receive executive coaching for 6 months. All the leaders that report to them also receive that coaching, because really the competencies needed to engage people so that they can feel comfortable in the workplace and create a consistent culture all starts with leadership credibility across the network. So those things together have created, I think, an environment and a culture where we can be successful scaling up academic performance, even in schools where we start in the deficit.
So to follow up, could Tennessee do anything to help eliminate the achievement gap? Anything further that you see that we could do?
Let Ryan run for governor.
Okay.
But no, on a serious note, that's a great question. I think for me, part of the frustration is how to have one source of truth. Because today, to John's question that he asked, if we walk out of here, everybody's going to interpret this totally different from what it is in the lens in which they want it to project. So I think one thing we need to do is find a source of trust, where if you go back, and the truth, more importantly, where we can require, like the district here at MNPS, to, if charters are in effect public schools, but also an adjacent business for them, because sometimes they love us, sometimes they hate us, when they report their academic results, it should also be able to separate what charters that they authorize and then compare the two of those so that parents could have a better understanding about their schools within the district. Without that, some of those changes in that case, then the false narrative comes out where they combine all of it together, then compare individual schools. I think that would be very helpful in terms of helping parents make better decisions. I think the other one is on accountability. At some point at the state level, I think we have to hold ourselves accountable for a lot of these areas across the state where academic performance hasn't improved in over decades or more. Yeah. There needs to be more specific intervention to those communities that have been underserved for that period of time. I think that's a moral issue and a few other things, but I'm gonna shut up.
Okay, let's go to Ryan, but let's stay in Tennessee. You saw the data. Tennessee's public charter schools are demonstrating strong growth. So as a member of the State Board of Education, what are the conditions in Tennessee that allow high quality public charter schools to be successful? What are those conditions?
So I was glad to hear Macke point to the authorizers, because that is, as the State Board of Education, to back up for a second, our role in this area is, initially the State Board was the appellate authorizer before the commission was created. And so I think that was sometime roughly 2013, 2014, when the State Board got involved in authorizing public charter schools. And then when the commission was created, we stepped back to have a role of overseeing authorizers. And for the past 2 years, we have been going through a full cycle. And Allie Reed, who is in the room somewhere, oversees this project. And we have rate authorizers on a variety of criteria, and then provide that feedback to them on what they're doing well, what they can improve on. And so it is a work in progress, but we like to think that is something that has made a difference so far, and hopefully will continue to make more and more of a difference over time, as well as kind of norming on what authorizers should look for in applications and in renewals, and being consistent on that. So the authorizer piece is something that, in my role on the State Board, that is very important. But I also think that if you look at the time period where so much of the growth happened, a lot of that was going from the first study to the second study, and now we've maintained it as the sector has grown in the third. And I think that attracting and retaining social entrepreneurs like Dwayne and Legra and others in this state who are willing to commit the long hours and do the hard work of founding and leading these schools. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the special sauce is in Tennessee, and I can't speak to how it may be different than other states. But I think that the same way that you have to keep great teachers in the classroom in order for students to learn, that you've got to have the principals at those schools, you have to have the leaders over those schools. Correct. Who can create that infrastructure, set the vision, and make sure that, and make the tough decisions about, do we stay where we are? Do we grow? How would we grow? That's really essential too. And I don't know what the answer is on that, other than it's just great to have people who are willing to do it.
Yeah. Speaking of great leadership, Legra, I'm gonna go to you for a second. We know that we heard about the strong results that you've achieved on the Tennessee assessments, ranking #1 for English language arts and math on your 22 TCAP results. I'm just gonna go right to the question. How do you use data to drive purpose prep?
Yes. So the first thing I want to say, when I thought about the results, last year we had groundbreaking results. We were the #1 in MNPS for growth in math and ELA. But all the conversations that I heard throughout the district was about growth. And so I want to caution us, and one of the ways that I appreciate the study from CREDO is that growth conversations require a comma, and you have to continue with academic performance. Too often, our state, our city leaders are putting a period after growth. And that is very detrimental when you really think about how children are truly performing. Coming out of COVID, scores were abysmal across the board. Everybody dropped. We were in a pandemic, we were learning virtual. So last year we come back, we're in person, and we experienced tremendous growth. And schools are being lauded for that, but 12% of your children are proficient. Mm-hmm. That's a problem. And so I want to make sure that I put a comma to the qualification, a lane of growth, and just share for purpose prep. It's important for us to share that, yes, we had level 5 TVOS for growth in both math and reading. But we also had level 5 for ELA performance. Mm-hmm. We were only one of 3 schools in the entire MNPS school district that had level 5. And of those 3 schools, only one had 90% population of children of color, and that was purpose prep. The other, when you have to dig into subgroups. And again, very appreciative of CREDO for thinking through, how are we serving children of color? How are we serving African Americans? At purpose prep, we were #1 elementary school for academic performance for African Americans in ELA, and number 2 for math. And then for economically disadvantaged students, we were the highest, number 1 in the school district for both ELA and math for our economically disadvantaged students. And so I want to push the conversation that we're having in our city and in our state to make sure that growth and academic performance are part of the conversation. I think it will really elevate how all of us are thinking about the true value that we're providing for the children that we serve. That being said, we use data in everything, all the decisions that we make at Purpose Prep. And so at a broad level, one of the most recent epiphanies that we've had as an organization really came through the 3rd grade retention law, when we were learning and kind of moving, as all schools were, to try to figure out how do we support our 3rd graders when they're faced with potentially being retained for not scoring proficiency. And what we realized when we were analyzing our data is that if you are a student at Purpose Prep and you've been at Purpose Prep for 2+ years, you have over 75% chance of earning proficiency, which is really high. Our new students to Purpose Prep were not achieving that type of proficiency at the same level. And so as an organization, we've been talking about, well, how do we support some of our newest students that are coming in 2nd grade, that are coming in 3rd grade? How do we move the needle there? And so decisions that we've been making as an organization has been, there's been the TN All-Core funding to support with extra interventions, after-school tutoring. So launching after-school tutoring and being very targeted to just support some of our newest students, or to really be strategic there. We think about it at the classroom level as well. So when teachers are thinking through, well, we need to reteach and think about data this way, they're reteaching lessons. When we think about what are the students that need interventions, we're thinking about the students that are performing lower than other students, and how do we intervene on those students? And we even think about data across classrooms. When we're receiving interim data and we have one class that is pushing 80% and we have another class that is barely pushing 60%, something's happening in this classroom where we need to provide additional professional development and supports to teachers, more interventions to students, to make sure that across our school we're equitable in terms of teacher quality and how students are being served by their teachers. So many ways, and we're very excited to dig deeper into the CREDO data and share that with our community, so that we're thinking through what are the benefits of charter schools in our state, and what does this mean for how Purpose Prep is contributing to that.
Thank you. Holly, I'm going to come to you. You've been directly supporting public charter schools in Tennessee since 2012, both at the Hyde Family Foundation and, of course, the Gestalt Public Schools. So the question for you is, from your perspective, what has contributed to the sustained growth in Tennessee since 2013, from the CREDO report to now the recent report?
I'll share a couple things. First, I just wanted to say I thought it was interesting to see the growth in Tennessee, because I do think it was a unique time, and Macke didn't necessarily speak to it, but I mean, we had our change in standards during that time, right?
Yes.
I mean, and that's been a huge part of my work since 2016 of supporting charter schools in what is the curriculum we need to now teach at this higher level of rigor? What is the instructional capacity we need to build in teachers and in leaders to support them? And that's been a huge body of work. And that happened right in the middle of this study. And so I think that was just another testament and made it even more significant, just based on my work. But the couple things I'd say is that I do think that I can at least speak for Memphis in that we learned from other states. So we weren't the first to go into the charter world, right? Even though we've been in it 20 years, I'd say though around 2011 to 2013, that's when we really started to scale. And I think we sought out national partners to say what's happened in other places? Let's learn from them. We don't have to recreate the wheel in every aspect, and we can learn from mistakes. And we also sought out partners like the Charter School Growth Fund. That was mentioned a lot in the CREDO study. They're a great partner to us in Memphis. And I mean, we've been able to rely on them to help us see what's really worked and moved the needle in other parts of the country. What are the best practices? What are the best classrooms we can take our leaders to see what excellence really looks like in other places? And in many cases, we've brought those practitioners, those education support organizations that have done great work in other states to Memphis and said, create the Memphis version of this. And we've invested in it if it was something that our leaders wanted to do and they felt like it would move the needle and it was a priority for them. So that's been a huge part of our work. And I'd say the second thing that I think really is the secret sauce in Tennessee and certainly in Memphis has been collaboration. I think that early on in my time in the charter sector, there was a little more competition. I mean, we were competing for students, we're competing for talent, and we still are. But there was a little more, keeping things close. And I think that as we started to scale and all hit a lot of bumps in the road, and then certainly with the 10 Ready standards, which kind of like knocked everyone backwards, I think people realized that we have a lot in common and we can learn from each other. And so we started to invest in a lot of cohort and collaborative type of professional development where we brought those single sites together, those standalone charters that are often isolated in their buildings, and we created cohorts where they're actually learning together. They get one-on-one support, but they also are learning together. They're walking each other's buildings and each other's classrooms and asking for feedback about what's good and what's bad and what can I do better. Now they're able to pick up the phone and call each other and say, I'm dealing with this challenge, help me. And so I think they've really appreciated that relationship building, and that collaboration has just been really important. And I think people have realized that if a charter down the street does well, my charter can do well, and that raises the sector, right? And if our sector is raised, the charter sector here in Memphis, that raises the charter sector across Tennessee. And then, by the way, if our charter sector continues to rise, that rises the level of performance in our district as a whole, traditional public schools and charters. And so I think just working together has really been important, important for our work in Memphis.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes, 5 minutes or so. So I've got a question that I'm just going to lay out for whomever has an opinion. Or we heard this morning about the improvements, of course, we've been talking about in the public sector, but a question for all of you over the last 15 years. And so what does the most recent data tell us? And I think this is important about the next opportunity of innovation and improvements in our public charter schools. That's food for thought, but ideas here?
Well, I would love to shout out single site schools.
That's right.
We're killing it. And I want to shout that out because for two reasons. First, we have been getting pressure to grow since we were like 3 years old. And at the time we were like, oh my goodness, like we're just too new to the work. Like how dare we think about growth? And our opinion has changed around growth. Our stance now is that we're doing this work. It's really hard work. How dare we think that we can replicate these results by growing? That's just personally where we are as an organization. But that being said, that makes it really difficult, which is my second point, to get funding. There's so many funders who will invest in schools with the purpose of growth. And oftentimes, single site schools are left out of those conversations because we don't want to grow. We don't want to add more students. We actually are content with serving our community really, really well. And how do we get supported to do that year after year? It is hard to maintain high results year after year. And so I want to urge us as a community, with all of the leadership that we have in this room and watching this, to really push on funding and policy supports for single site schools to continue to sustain ourselves and be the high performing organizations that we are.
I agree. It's hard to sustain after being in it. Dwayne, I'm sure you have some.
Yeah, I have as a multi-site network with 6 schools. We achieved sustainability on the per pupil funding 3 years ago. So there's no billionaire giving us money to fund teacher compensation and then enhancements that we made in those programs. I think it's very important that if you're going to drive good academic results and give a return on investment to students and families, you need to be able to do that in a manner in which you can self-fund those things that you want to prioritize that you think are most important. So we found a way of doing that by being more efficient in terms of how we look at our organization. I'd like to add something to Legra's point about the growth, not to get into the math behind it all, but if we simply fall for the discussion around growth, it's not going to get us there at all. And more importantly, if you go through the math, we have one middle school as an example with 500 students in it. But it could be a level 5 TBOS growth, which is the highest you can get. And literally, there may be only one teacher in the entire building who carried the entire school because of their individual classroom results. You literally could have, I'm not saying this is us, I'm just giving you an illustration, but if you then look at who's on grade level in that middle school, you may only have 3 kids out of 500 on grade level. So the conversation has to go beyond just growth, but growth is important because in our case, if we take in kids that come out of priority schools that are zoned to us, we can't just say we can't take you. And if they're coming in 2 or 3 years behind on everything, then you have to measure growth, because if you're not getting more than 1 year's worth of growth each year, you're not making any progress. In our case, what we found out, if you have level 5 teachers, they can make up those 2 years of academic loss and more in 1 year. So that's why we're prioritizing.
You said earlier, it's about
Yeah,
really
about
highly effective teachers. We got about a minute left. Any other comments on the next piece of innovation?
I don't know if it's an innovation, but just a thought that I have listening to the conversation is about the challenge for the charter sector in Tennessee to kind of get the word out about the successes, kind of the communications piece of getting out the fact that this sort of data from the CREDO study, all the successes that are happening in the classrooms, and a part of that, or related to that, is, as many or most people in the room know, the State Department of Education is going to be rolling out the A through F grades for schools over the next few months. And that's something where I think it is a good thing for families to be able to evaluate using data, how are schools doing? But the devil is obviously in the details of how do you measure that? And so, growth versus achievement, and what is a fair, appropriate way to use the law and the system that is being rolled out to communicate some of this sort of information that we've been talking about today, about where schools are really shining and doing great work for students. I don't have the answer to that, but wanted to put it out.
I think, Allegra, you've been a reward school, and that means that you hit both measures, that you did hit the TVOS and you did hit, the proficiency levels of students. And that's what you really are looking for as we go along improving schools. Any last 30-second thoughts, Holly?
30 seconds. I think we're well positioned to continue growth. I agree. Obviously it's very difficult, but we have to continue to grow to get to those levels of proficiency, which is the real end goal. And I think we're well positioned, and what we didn't have 5 years ago, we were on our way under the new standards, I think, before the pandemic hit. Obviously had to deal with COVID and its impact, but I think we're back on track. And now we have a lot of tools and resources in place in our state for all schools, with TISA funding, with more tutoring happening now, with more students attending summer school, with really figuring out how to get intervention right. I think that there's a lot we know now, and I hope that means that we'll really continue to see, that growth happening into the next several years and get to those levels of proficiency we want.
Thank you. We could go on and on with this. Thank you for your insight and the information that you've shared. It certainly leaves some, I think, food for thought for all of us. But at this time, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Maya Bug, and she's going to give us our closing remarks.
And Dr. Swafford, a round of applause. Excellent, thank you. And this panel actually consists of 4 of my amazing board members for the Tennessee Charter School Center. So thank you, we appreciate you. Very special thanks to Director Macke, and also to our partners at SCORE for working with us to share this information with the community today. Research like CREDO's National Charter School Study not only helps schools identify areas of growth, but also helps charter support organizations like the Tennessee Charter School Center to advocate for critical policies at the state level that ensure charter schools have the resources they need most. The CREDO study also allows us the ability to work with schools to catalog and share best practices so that all students can benefit. As we've heard today, the study's results highlight areas of success for public charter schools across the country, and specifically here in Tennessee. The results also illustrate areas where public charter schools can use their flexibility and innovative models to push through challenges. With growth at the forefront, public charter schools will continue to improve student outcomes across the state. And this means that the charter sector is well-positioned to change lives and impact generations of families across the state. Together with partners like SCORE and the dedicated work of educators in public charter schools across the state, we look forward to stronger results in the next CREDO study. Also, this report is quite timely because, as Holly mentioned, this year we are celebrating 20 years of public charter schools in Tennessee. That's when you're supposed to clap. So we're actually going to be celebrating charter champions past and present at our 20th anniversary gala in Memphis on October 27th. And we really hope that everybody will be there to celebrate the success and the wins and the struggles of our sector. We've grown quite a bit. So to learn more about public charter schools, visit the Tennessee Charter School Center and SCORE's websites. And we just want to thank you all for being here with us today. We appreciate you all. Again, special thanks to Director Macke and all of you. Have a great afternoon or morning.